Welcome to Global Legal Tech Talks presented in partnership with Disco. My name's Frances Anderson, CEO of NetLaw Media, and I'm delighted to welcome you all for today's live session. So, from automation to autonomy, how agentic AI is reshaping high impact law firms. So, let's look at this. So, as AI merely assists is no longer enough. Agentic AI can coordinate tasks, make decisions, and drive complex legal workflows end to end, but only if firms deploy it with intent. This high-level fireside chat will cut through the hype to examine the real opportunities, risks, and readiness challenges of agentic AI in legal practice. Our speakers will share where firms are seeing genuine productivity and quality gains today and how leaders should prepare their firms for an AI-driven based operating model. Guiding today's discussion is our chair, Christina Blacklaws. This webinar is live and we actively encourage you to participate. So please use the Q&A or chat function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions for our speakers, and we'll do our best to address them all during the session today. Now, it's my absolute pleasure. Let me get the words out right today. It's just starting wrong. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our chair. Christina Blacklaws is the current chair of LegalTech UK and a former president of the Law Society of England and Wales. That is the representative body of over 200,000 solicitors. She is an innovator in the legal field, having developed and managed one of the first virtual law firms and set up UK's first alternative business structure with the Cooperative Group. She is also one of the first directors of innovation at a top tier UK firm. So please join me in welcoming Christina Blacklaws. Christina, it's over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Frances. Good afternoon. Well, I should say good evening and good morning because people might be watching this at any time of the day. Very warm welcome to everybody who has joined us. And I know that we've got a lot of really strong and senior stakeholders who are coming from legal, from operations and technology. And as Frances said, that's the right framing for today. Moving from something that is automatic, generative AI, to something that has autonomy. We have, I think, over the last couple of years, so much focus has been on what actually helps us work a little bit faster, draft a bit better, analyze a bit more efficiency. But now we're starting to see something that's really quite different. So agentic AI, we're not talking about just things that support tasks, but actually drive process from end to end. And that raises some fundamental questions for us in the legal industry, and ones which I really hope Pam and I are going to be able to dive into today. So, where is this genuinely delivering value? As Frances said, let's cut through that hype. Where are the risks, particularly in a legal context, and perhaps, most importantly, how ready are we really for this shift from assistance to autonomy? So let's get real. We're going to talk about actual use cases, what's working, what isn't, what's going on the ground, and a little bit about what we might see in the next 12 to 24 months. Because let's face it, if anybody is thinking further ahead than that, they're a braver woman than I. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Pamela Hill from CS Disco, who is right in the center of this space. Pam, I'm going to bring you in shortly so you can tell us a little bit about your journey, the work that you're doing. But before we do that, audience, can we get a quick sort of sense of where you are today? So we've got a very quick poll. I'm going to give you just a few minutes to address it. Here we are. It's up. It should be up on your screens now. Oh, I can't vote. That's annoying. But everybody, can you please and be honest, where is your firm today? So, are you actively utilizing agentic AI in earnest? Is it in production? Is it nearly there? Are you piloting, experimenting, exploring? Or is it something you've got obviously an interest in because you're here at this webinar, but that you haven't actually in your firm deployed anything yet? Give you another few seconds just to, hopefully this is not a tricky one to answer for people. Um, yeah, let's have the answers. All right. Okay, so that's quite interesting. Uh, More people actively using than I thought,
Oh,
but that's great. So, let before I go any further, Pam, would you like to introduce yourself and then, perhaps a little reflection on what that poll's told us? Thank you.
absolutely. So grateful to be here. Obviously, my name is Pam Hill. I am, as you can probably tell from my accent, based out of the US. Um, so I'm coming to you from just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I've spent my entire career in law. So I started right out of college at Wilmer Hale in a support role. And I loved it so much that I abandoned my med school dreams and decided to go to law school instead. While in law school, I focused my studies on intellectual property, and then after law school, practiced intellectual property for several years before taking a turn into e-discovery. So about a decade ago, I made the switch over to e-discovery. I started um, as a review manager and spent many years as a project manager, directly servicing our clients both in, relativity spaces, other platforms, and then finally Disco. And then a couple of years ago, made the switch over to our product team. So product marketing, which is what I do now, is housed within our product org. And one of the things that is my particular focus in our product org is our agentic AI offering. So really excited to talk about that with you guys today.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much, Pam, and it's a pleasure to have this conversation
Yeah,
with you. I'm excited about it.
me
But
too.
let's start off really, really simply, hey. So what does agentic AI actually mean in a legal context beyond the buzzword?
Yeah, and I want to note that I didn't really reflect on the poll, but I'm very glad to see that people are starting to explore this because from my perspective, agentic AI in the legal context, agentic AI is fairly nascent in the legal sphere. We tend to be in law because of all of the concerns that we have about privacy, about security, about confidentiality really don't necessarily apply in wider contexts. That can lead us to be a little bit stodgier in terms of tech, a little bit slower to respond. So I'm thrilled to see that people are really starting to explore and starting to dive in because it is, I think, going to be one of those value adds that will in short order become a necessary part of your firm's life. But in terms of how I would kind of frame out and define agentic AI for legal, is really focused on the autonomy. So whereas generative AI, and of course, agentic AI is a subset of generative AI, right? It's still operating using the same kind of large language models, but it's taking it a step further. It's reducing the human in the loop impact. And it's not reactive anymore, it's proactive. It's maintaining that autonomy of how to attack, solve, and respond to a problem. So you frame out your problem, but maybe you're not quite as worried about prompt framing because it has the ability to kind of understand at a bit of a deeper level and address the problem in a multi-part, multi-step reasoning exercise.
It's really helpful, I think, to see how the as you've explained it, the sort of iteration. Do you think this is a step change in terms of moving from automation or Gen AI?
I think so. I think ultimately we're going to get the the space where the human has to remain in the loop is going to shrink. It's going to become more more automated, less guidance. You'll have a true, almost like a digital assistant. I think we are getting there. We will go there. We're not there yet, at least in law, but it's just a matter of time, I think.
Well, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball, or at least look ahead a few weeks, in the not too distant. But without getting too technical, because you'll lose me, that's for sure. You know, what's happening under the hood that makes this different?
So without getting too technical, we've moved from a kind of reactive retrieval kind of RAG-based system where it's a one-shot, almost like a souped-up search, right?
Yeah.
Where it's relying on the word vectors, but it's only a one-shot deal. We've moved from that, which is what you experience in your chatbots, to something that's potentially leveraging multiple different types of large language models and deciding based on the task which large language model it's going to use to perform whatever task. It's also leveraging different tools. So, it's deciding, I can speak a little bit to our generative AI offering, but it's deciding, when I ask a question of Cecilia Advanced Research, our newest Agentic AI product, I can see that it's going through and it's leveraging tools. It's breaking down my question. It's leveraging different search terms. And I can see that it's giving me the search terms and saying, okay, well, this is how I interpret your question. And to be able to answer this, I need to look at this, 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 and this. And then it'll go and kind of auto scroll and undertake those pathways. So I think that's really the distinction there.
You know, it's almost like we've talked about this before, Pam. So I was going to say, let's bring this to life with a bit of a
Yeah,
demo. So
love to.
perhaps you could take over the screen and show our audience, what do you mean by that in real life
Absolutely.
and why?
Absolutely. I'd love to bring it to life a little bit. So, can everyone see my screen? Can you see my
I
screen,
can,
Christina? Great.
yeah.
So this is, for those of you who have used Disco, this should be familiar to you. Our newest iteration of Cecilia is going to be, when it is released widely, it will just be housed in the exact same spot that you enjoy our current Q&A chatbot. But it's providing you a different mode. So we call it advanced research mode, and this will be familiar to those who have used kind of commercial tools or external tools, where you can choose between the level of digging that it will do when you ask your questions. So we're not sunsetting our original Cecilia, we're keeping it and converting it to what we call quick thinking mode, because that's what it is, right? It's really intended for those situations where you need to immediately verify a fact. Who did this? When did they do it? Did so-and-so ever have any communication with so-and-so? When you want to get to that heavier, deeper level of comprehension, that's where you toggle over to advanced research mode. You can scope it wherever you like across your entire data set, or scope down to just a narrow folder if you have a very discrete inquiry. And you can do that just right from a secure space, because of course, all being lawyers, the first thing we think about is, is my client's data secure? Are we maintaining that level of confidentiality? I mean, of course, for me, I'm like, we, as lawyers who develop this product, we have to ensure that, because, we look at it like, if I were using this for my clients on my clients' data, am I risking my licensure to use this product? It really is that significant. So I have it open here and I want to show you guys. I'm not going to make you suffer through my typing, so forgive me that it's a copy paste moment. But these are the kinds of questions that we ask. So create a detailed timeline of events. Of course, we are in the Enron data set, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that we all know it. So we can kind of fact check the answers live. So create a detailed timeline of all events related to the Raptor SPEs from creation to their final unwinding. And these are the kinds of things that we developed this agentic version of Cecilia for. Creation of timelines, creation of witness lists. So when you're really early in your case, maybe you're still undergoing collections and you want to know, who am I? Are there any additional custodians that I don't already know about? So it'll create a chart of key players for you. Gap analysis. So of course, as a former PM, I'm always thinking about incoming productions, but that also can encompass, maybe you're taking over an inherited case from prior counsel and you want to make sure that they collected everything they could, that it was appropriately collected, that it's maintaining appropriate metadata. That's the kind of thing that you can do with this tool. Of course, here in the US, we do a lot of depositions. So it's a huge use case for us as well across the pond is deposition prep. Prepping your witness is not the least of it, right? It's prepping yourself, making sure that you have everything you need to present to that witness. And then, of course, things like large-scale summarization across large sets. So communication, all communications, the tone, the tenor of those conversations between several parties, as well as sentiment analysis. So that's where you get something that a RAG-based system really can't do is read between the lines and look for the evolution of a relationship between two parties. So great for internal EEO type, harassment, discrimination, HR type investigations, as well as just, your business to business lawsuits. Things soured, right? We had a relationship, things soured. I want to find out what that looked like over time. So as you can see, it takes just a few minutes to come back with an answer. But while it's doing that, it gives you its reasoning. So you talked a little bit, Christina, you used the phrase under the hood, and I'm glad you did, because this is what we are able to do here now. It's not a black box, which is, I think, one of the paramount concerns for lawyers, right? It is a scary thing for us not to be able to get ahead of a bad fact because we don't know about it. No one wants to get surprised. So this is something where you know the limitations, you know what it's looking at. So right here, it begins with an issue spotter. It regurgitates the question to me. So I can tell from the beginning if it's getting it right. If it's not, this is actually, while it's running, it converts to a little stop box. So I can just cut it off right at the head and reframe my prompt to be more accurate. So it's one of those things where it helps you. I had a client tell me once, oh, so if I don't know, sometimes I know in my gut what I want, but I don't know exactly how to frame it, especially when you're talking to AI. So this will help me kind of figure out how I say what I need to say. And I think that's right. Helps you reframe yourself. And then it will tell you those investigative paths explored. So that's where we talk about that autonomy, that goal-oriented planning, the breaking down of these kind of broad objectives down into step-by-step plans and leveraging tools. So you can see it's giving me it's leveraging search terms. It's giving me the terms it's using and then analyzing, going down, taking a turn through a different path until it exhausts enough to be able to answer the question. And then when it does, you're able to see that the level of play that we're at now with these agentic tools is much more comprehensive. So it's able to answer much more complex queries and deliver much more comprehensive results. So we're not talking about just a block of text anymore. We're talking about formatted work product that gives you your V1 of a memo, then of course, as lawyers, we look at that, and this gives us the starting block. But that saves you so much time in your associate's time developing this. So you can really dig into the perfectionist aspect of our natures, right? You can make this exactly what you want. So you're able to see that not only is it giving you a timeline that's just hard and fast points, but it's really breaking it down into categories as well. So it's what I would consider more, this would be the first thing I would ask an associate to do on a case is give me my chronology of events in this case. And it does that, but I would be happy to receive a result that showed this level of consideration for the overarching eras of my case. And of course, it gives you a little summary at the end, so you know where you've been and kind of where you're going. So what do you think, Christina?
Great. I mean, yeah, it's fantastic to see it sort of live like that as well. Um, Thank you for that demo. I think for people who are not quite sure what it does and mean in practice, they've now got a real live example in their minds. And I guess that's one work type. What other workflows do you think are genuinely ready for this, and perhaps which are not?
Um, I think our best use case here, and really what kicked us off into building this, is deposition prep. And so, and that can extend to any sort of witness, prep. And by that, I mean prep on our end, right? That anything that is your initial step, whether that's creation of your timeline, figuring out your witness list, that can be such an onerous task and such a time-consuming task that's where these kinds of tools shine in the beginning of your case, because it just is the place where you're spending so much time familiarizing yourself with the nuts and bolts. And this lets you kind of zoom to the front of the class.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. And perhaps to dig in even further into that, where are you seeing law firms get real productivity or quality gains today, or are you seeing more pilots? Where are you seeing the real impact?
I haven't seen a lot of the clients that I'm talking to. It's interesting because, as someone who's been in this for over a decade now, I never saw this kind of excitement around TAR,
Yeah.
right? So this is it's really new in a lot of ways. There was no excitement around LegalTech. It was a tool that you had to use, not a tool that you got to use. So when we announced this agentic version of Cecilia, it was really the first agentic tool that was developed and housed within a database and developed for lawyers and for law specifically. So I haven't seen, most of what I've seen is kind of exploration, like really reflecting our polls here, exploration of use cases among our lawyers. However, I have seen in my conversations with our clients just really surprising levels of adoption of generative AI. So of course, agentic AI is a subset of generative AI. I have seen a shocking level of adoption of generative AI tools in a great way, right? I think this is one of those situations where TAR was a bit inscrutable, right? It required these really, at times, very complex workflows, sampling, things that were not easily accessible and really not translatable from our day-to-day work as lawyers. Generative AI, and you're not using it in your daily life either. It's not a facet of daily life. It's something that is very discreet and locked into law.
Yeah.
This is not. These are the tools that people use in their day-to-day life. People are using ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude at home as just part of their home workflows. And so that drives a lot more familiarity. It drives a lot more comfort. It also drives a lot more innovation because you have clients coming to us and saying, well, why can't I have that in my database? And our answer is, well, why can't you have that in your database? You can have that in your database. Let's get you that. So I've seen clients adopting generative AI at scale and um, using it in, their IP cases to track the changes to claims over time, in those HR type investigations to really delve deep into the breakdown of a relationship, to find those things that are so difficult to find, right? It's so difficult to pinpoint with search terms. I mean, I would spend hours and hours helping people design search terms to really get at these really precise concepts, all the while knowing that statistically search term retrieval is somewhere around 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are
I
leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you're saying about how now it's sort of almost embedded in culturally
Mhm.
into not just our professional but also our personal lives. And from my perspective, I'm seeing quite a lot in the transactional world as well,
Mhm.
whether that's analyzing contracts, running due diligence, generating insight dashboards, that sort of
Absolutely.
area where we're moving from something that's where you've got, instead of having AI running a task, you've got AI running a workflow, and that's the real step
Yes.
change I think that we're experiencing with those firms that are now moving from very quickly, I think, from pilot to full implementation, because they just see the huge value that can be brought to the business in doing that. So a lot of contract lifestyle management
Mhm.
in that as well. So
Yeah.
I guess the question then is, what does sort of a successful deployment from your perspective actually
Yeah.
look like in practice? So, where have you seen it work really well for firms? What's the secret sauce there
What's the secret
that goes
sauce?
into that? Yeah.
I think it's a few things. Um, I mentioned earlier, law firms can be a little stodgy. So I think openness to using this at all. That's where there has been that shift between TAR and generative AI wholly, is there's more, it's that familiarity which drives that openness. So openness to using it, reduction of those blockers to use. So a lot of firms will have these AI committees, right? And making sure your AI committee is flexible enough to allow for pilots, to allow for you to actually use these tools and to move quickly rather than, quite being a little slower to adopt. So we've seen firms, and we've seen this in the States, I think, smaller firms move more quickly on this. Bigger firms, and this is no surprise, right? Bigger firms have a lot more risk, and their risk tolerance is much lower. So they tend to be a little slower to adopt these. But there has now been a pretty significant change even in that, because it's affecting recruiting. Firms are telling us I have to, because this is such a big part of our culture now, your, top associate recruits, your hottest recruits, they're trying to find out if this firm is tech forward so that they're working as efficiently as they can and using the best tools that they can, that they may have, at least in law school for me, we got access to all of the newest Westlaw stuff that the firms didn't have because of the price. So it was the way to kind of get the newest Westlaw into your firm because your associates were asking for it at hiring. So that's still the case here. These associates are used to using these tools. So, I'd heard that from multiple partners. And then another part of that secret sauce of driving adoption and driving these efficiencies is really making sure, of course, as part of that AI committee, that you have a really good change management plan in place. So making sure everyone is bought in, everyone feels comfortable because the ROI is there. You're able to see, we have clients telling us this took me half the time. We have partners who had not been in a database in years, being like, I don't know what I would do without this. The ROI is the time savings for lawyers is, arguable.
In fact, that's we've got a question on ROI
Oh,
actually.
wonderful.
It's come
I love it.
in. So perhaps, yeah, perhaps you could, as we're talking about it, it says, what does a proven ROI from agentic AI actually look like in a law firm, and how do leaders measure value beyond time saved? So, yeah, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah. How does it look like in a law firm? You know, Beyond time saved. Well, we still mostly, at least here, time saved is the main measure, right? It's when we're billing in 6-minute increments, I think it's kind of hard to overstate that as the touchstone of ROI. But there's also the soft portions of that too, and how this makes you feel about the work that you're doing. When your time is saved and you're able to be more efficient, your work becomes less stressful. We've talked for years and years in law, since I was in law school easily, but potentially before, about, crisis in the industry, mental health crises. And I think providing, obviously this is not a panacea, but providing tools that help reduce stress in a meaningful way because they are taking more work off your plate. Now, there's also the assumption that, well, if there's a little space on your plate, it's going to get filled pretty quickly with something else. But taking those more mundane yet time-consuming tasks off your plate, that makes your work life more enjoyable. And especially providing tools that you enjoy using can provide that kind of, it's not what I would consider necessarily ROI in terms of measurability, but you can measure the index of how people feel at their work.
Yeah.
And the downstream effects of that with, employee turnover rates.
I think that's absolutely right. And I also think there are hard measures that you can use as well. You know how much it costs you in terms of resource and time
Yep.
to undertake one task, but it's also the level of the individual who's undertaking that task as well, and the cost of yes, the return on investment, but the opportunity cost of being able to shift that person into doing something that's much more client focused, for example. So you can measure how much it cost you before the process and how much it costs you with utilizing agentic AI. So I think there are hard measures, and a lot of firms that I've come across, they're like, I think you said gut before. They just know that
Hmm.
they are saving a lot of time and
Yeah.
and therefore money, because that is their personal experience in terms of utilizing particularly agentic AI, which still feels like a little bit of magic to me. But I wanted to just check with you as well about client expectation, because
Mhm.
again, I'm seeing that a lot of that has shifted quite radically, with clients saying, don't you dare put any of my data near any AI, to saying, okay, how are you going to utilize it to give me those, better and faster insights? I want earlier case management. I want more certainty. Is that something that you're seeing as well? And I see we've got another couple of questions. I'll come.
Yeah, and we have quite the questions kind of go to that, I think. So,
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting shift industry-wide that 2 years ago, I would have said most of the client interactions or end client interactions about this were justify use, right? Justify your use of generative AI tools. Tell me how, like, I cannot be okay with you using these until I am confident they are secure, that my data is not leaving,
Yeah.
that my that LLM used, that the LLM training on my data, that the learnings from that training are not being applied to someone else's data. Now that we have shifted to and I heard this directly from clients at Legal Week, justifying non-use. Clients are now, this is generative AI and the use of these LLMs in law is now, in their view, sufficiently seasoned. There are enough platforms. It's not just Disco that has this. Every major platform has some sort of generative AI tool. So they, at this point, have kicked the tires and trust that it's not, it's locked into their data. The LLM is not retaining your questions, your answers, all of that. It's not using that to train on other people's data. This is an industry-wide expectation because frankly, we could not operate these tools for lawyers if we weren't able to deliver this. It would not be able, just the kind of work that we do, it's not possible.
Yeah, it's a sort of
Um,
hygiene thing built in then, is it?
exactly. It is, and I think it's really why it took longer for law to react to the ChatGPT OpenAI revolution
Yeah.
of 4 years ago, because we had to make sure that we could build those guardrails in place. So, I am seeing now that clients, those end clients, those big enterprise firms are saying, okay, you need to staff a leaner team because now we know that you can operate on a more efficient model. And, um, you know, when I get your bill, and we're seeing this written into outside counsel guidelines and those kinds of agreements. If I see a bill for an associate in a kind of, whether it's drafting, whether it's kind of research, these are things that clients are saying, we're using generative AI tools to help you with this. We've explicitly allowed you to use those, and our expectation is that you will use them to reduce our spend on you. So that it's really kind
Yeah.
of a bifurcated approach there.
So in answer to that question we've got in the Q&A, will
Mm,
time savings mean costs and savings be passed on to client? It sounds like yes, because they will
yes,
insist upon it. So
exactly.
yeah,
Yes, it's not, it's, yes, they will insist upon it, but,
yeah,
a savvy law firm is going to find another way to fill that gap, right?
yeah.
If it's, maybe, and then maybe that becomes, you know, spending more time on making sure that brief that you've been drafting is completely airtight and represents the best possible, as lawyers, we want to have a perfect work product, but time is not our friend in that respect. And so we make peace with good. And I think these tools allow you to get a little bit closer to that perfection just because you have the time to do it.
And that's quite a good segue into the other question that we've currently got in the chat, which is how do you assure the quality and the propriety of the data Cecilia is trained on and draws from, both from your databases and the clients users? And perhaps I could add to that just some reflections on data advantage, really, and what law firms or legal teams need to do vis-a-vis their own data as well.
Yeah, I think this really just goes to basic collection and data hygiene from the beginning. All of the things that we did before the Gen AI revolution to be able to interrogate our data ourselves with our own brains and our own search terms um, haven't gone away. You still need to ensure that you are um, conducting appropriately scoped collections so that you have valuable data to look at, so that you're not just looking at someone's Amazon receipts. Um, you need to be, for all of your incoming productions, you need to be ensuring that they're providing you with appropriately OCR text that you QC and make sure is actually valuable to you. So all of these good hygiene practices that we developed over, the course of, I don't know when concordance load files became standard, I don't know, 25 years ago. Those remain.
Yeah.
Until we, you know, we're stuck with text for a while yet. So all of that good hygiene remains.
Okay, so data hygiene, knowledge management, quality and structuring of data is all pretty foundational here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And the knowledge management is key there too, because I left off the user part, but thank you for the reminder. You need to make sure that your users are, at least at this point, have a baseline education in how to interact with generative AI and agentic AI, where they know how to frame out prompts. They know where to look for liabilities. They know to make sure to check all of those sources to say, that we've seen in other cases, not within databases, but we've seen in other cases where, these tools will come up with a beautiful looking brief and it's all rigorously cited. But then you click into those citations and they don't actually stand for, especially this happens with case law. It takes a lot of training to be able to figure out the holding versus the dicta when it's all so, beautifully written. So those situations where these cases are being cited and either this case has been overturned or vacated, or it doesn't stand for the proposition it's being cited for, those are the kinds of things where you really need to have that knowledge management. You really need to have that training on, look, you would do this QC if you got it from an associate. That remains. But you need to ensure that you're doing even more fulsome QC a little bit because it didn't go to law school.
Yeah.
These things are going to change, though. It is a fact of our technological advance that it gets better
Yeah.
and it gets more savvy.
I think it's Richard Susskind's very fond of saying that the technology is the worst it will ever be today. So
I love that. Yes, that's exactly right. All of the things that we're talking about right now, like, I mean, I am sure in 2 years, I'm going to laugh out loud that, talking about, oh, we need to get so good at prompt framing.
Yeah.
Well, now with the agentic, or agentic Cecilia, you don't as much as you would have with quick thinking mode. You can see that it's regurgitating the question. It understands, even if you stumble a little bit or frame it out not perfectly. It's getting better every day. So those exercises will eventually become moot.
So, we've been very positive and optimistic so far. We've talked about all the, the advantages here, but let's dig into some of the risks, some of the issues that are associated with this, and, perhaps some of the governance concerns. So, what are your biggest concerns around agentic AI? Perhaps in the sort of making or influencing legal decisions area. You've talked about hallucinations, you've talked about
Yeah.
it getting things wrong, and the need, thankfully, for lawyers still to exist, at least in
Yes.
2026. You know, and that's obviously a big issue. You've talked a little bit about the black box issue.
Yeah.
Do you think that is going to be an ongoing problem, or is there going to be greater explainability and transparency just sort of hardwired into the products?
I think the biggest risk, and this kind of encompasses all of these really, is that it is so powerful that people want to treat it as a panacea.
Yeah.
You know, and this is something that I have heard from folks who have been in legal tech for a long time and are on the firm side now, where they say, you know, I have partners coming to me and being like, well, can't I just throw this all into, you know, Harvey or Cecilia or what have you? And the answer is like, eh? You can, but ultimately you are responsible for the result. And so the risk is, you know, we've seen so many cases now of lawyers submitting briefs that were written by AI. They are full of hallucinations and they get sanctioned.
Mm-hmm.
So the risk is your livelihood. And do you feel comfortable with that risk? Now, I think as things continue to develop, um, that risk is going to lessen, you know, as the technology matures, and agentic represents a significant step in that maturity, where you get that ability to, you know, your black box shrinks. You're able to trust but verify. You're able to see if things are going down the wrong path and explore a different one. So you're able to be a bit more agile. So it gives you the ability to do a bit more of that QC and mitigate that risk. But those are the main ones I see that people really people want to use this again in a way that's so wholly different from my experience with TAR, where explaining it, I would watch their eyes just glaze over, you know. But here,
I remember those days.
oh God. And I'm like, it can really help you. And they're like, I'm not feeling helped by this conversation. So, you know, here they want to use it.
Yeah.
And so it's just bringing people back to earth of like, okay, it's not perfect yet. Yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
And how in your experience, how are firms or legal departments addressing that sort of regulatory and perhaps ethical
Mhm.
risk in practice? What are they doing to ensure that you know, eager, enthusiastic partners
Yes.
are not putting the firms at risk?
So savvy firms who are really implementing these all have AI committees, and they are either engaging outside consultancies to fill those knowledge gaps that they have, or they are really proactive in doing hosting internal trainings, external trainings, making sure that people have the knowledge within the firm to be able to be a point of contact for any questions. They're hosting events within their firm. They're making sure all of their folks are both bought in and sufficiently trained to help everyone kind of mitigate that risk together, as well as providing, additional kind of change management ramping. So not just kind of deploying and caution to the wind. They're taking an approach to essentially ensure that users are supported to be able to address that.
Okay, thank you. So, audience, we're coming to our last sort of 10 minutes. We've taken questions as we've been going along, but encourage you as you know, you're obviously a very savvy audience to ask us some
Mhm.
tricky questions in the last few minutes. But before we
Yeah,
get to that, um, Pam, I did say I'd ask you to sort of peer a little into the future.
sure.
So, you know, how do you think agentic is going to change the the operating models of law firms, not just the tools that they are using? You know, what do you see the shift will be in that?
I think it's going to be largely client driven, right? I think in the early stages, it's going to allow, it won't necessarily, this is going to be a longer term shift in operating models for law firms. That in the early stages, the efficiency just means that you are going to be able to staff more leanly, which we're already seeing, and staff more leanly and more broadly, meaning that each team is smaller, but each person on that team is able to take on more cases, right? Especially at the associate level.
And do
But
you, sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you there,
please.
but do you mean more broadly as in with a different to legal skill set as well, embedded in the teams? Is that what
Yeah.
you see
That as
as
well. I
well?
mean, I think that in quite short order is going to become a requisite part of being a lawyer. That
Yeah.
you're going to need to understand these tools in a way that you didn't before. Um, just to be able, as a basic competency of being a lawyer. I mean, here in the US, we have, as part of our professional rules of conduct, we have a requirement of competency in basic legal technology. You can't get your older partners can't, as of 20 years ago, couldn't get away with not sending emails anymore. This is going to be one of those basic tools of competency that you have to be able to use to do the practice. So I think there's that. But in terms of broad broad reach, I think it's also just as simple as more cases on your plate and more cases that you're responsible for. And then, but as that those efficiency gains trickle down and are kind of driven by clients saying, no, you have to be using these tools. Um, I think that may ultimately shift firms' hiring models for how they support. I mean, all of this, large associate classes were really based on a model of having an enormous amount of things like document review, of work that you could not reasonably have a partner do.
Mm.
Um, you know, Lower value work that you can't charge partner rates for. Now, that was chipped away with tar, and now it's really been swept away and will be as people do much more adoption of generative AI, doc review, and all of these tools brought together. Is going to really sweep away a lot of that work. Um, and I think so that's going to kind of eat into the justification for having big associate classes. So the firms that are already on more of a pillar model, I don't think will need to change so much. But firms that relied on those big associate classes may have to look at how they're operating.
So I think you've talked about roles and functions, and I agree with you. I think that there's going to be a sort of fundamental shift in terms of operating model, and this
Mhm.
will be a clear differentiator in the very near future as to firms that are moving rapidly towards that, and those who are still hoping that the billable hour will out and that they can continue to charge for
Yeah.
fairly low grade work that can be at least automated per task, if not automated per whole workflow. So where do you see the value shifting in the legal services chain then? How do you see next 12 to 18 months?
I think, you know, if we're using the past 12 to 18 months as any indicator, the adoption is going to be logarithmic. And, you know, as someone who had worked on the legal services side for a long time, you know, the hours that people are working to do these tasks that can be automated are very long. And there is if my plate as a PM, there was always something to do. So I think it's kind of similar to how, you know, it is going to be for associates, at least in the near term, that you're going to be able to be much, that efficiency just means you can do more. And your ability, you're happier, potentially happier in your role, because you're not spending your time knowing that you have this much more difficult work on your plate that you can't get to because you have to tackle this more you know, kind of drudgery first. So I think it's going to be for those in legal services an immediate force multiplier that you can leverage to be able to get everything done that you reasonably need to get done. Because we haven't even broached the fact that we now have an entirely new source of collectible, discoverable material too. It's not just that we're using this to do our work, it's also generating more work for us from the client end. Their ChatGPT history, their, you know, all of the things that they're generating. And now with Agentic, you know, you can take a question and turn it into a presentation, you know, these kinds of things. It's creating more white papers, presentations, memos, emails that are now part of your reviewable corpus.
Great. Well, before I ask you the very final question, let's have our last poll because I'm really interested to see what the audience says. So, you know, our question here it is: do you expect your organisation to be using Agentic AI in the next 12 to 24 months? So
Very interested to see this.
yeah, let's see if there's any sort of shift forward from the first question. So, audience, if you can vote, please. Give you another few seconds to do that before we come on to what will be my final question to you, Pam. So let's have a look. Oh, yes. Yes.
Yep.
Mrs. Sense, unsure. Okay. Sorry, unsure.
I'm glad you guys agree with my crystal ball. I really do.
But nobody has said no.
Yeah.
So in that, given that, advice to the audience, Pam, what should they be doing now to prepare? You have about a minute.
Great. I'm on the clock. Really make sure you know all of the continuous discovery, right? Make sure you're constantly keeping abreast of new developments, that you are kicking the tires on them, that you're asking, you know, sitting in those demos, making sure if you can get in and talk to someone who is working in the development of these products, do it. Anything you can do to ensure that you are getting the best information about the products that are available to you is going to help you build the knowledge base you need to be able to then disseminate that to your teams. Continue to build out the infrastructure within your firms, within your orgs, to ensure that you have the appropriate guardrails in place for both ethical considerations and data privacy and security, but that maintains sufficient flexibility for you to be able to trial new tools. so that you're not finding your AI teams to be blockers, but rather partners.
Well, sage advice. Thank you very much, Pam, and thank you for all your insights today. It's been a super interesting chat. Thank you to everybody for joining us for Legal Tech Talks and for Netlaw Media for hosting us. It's been such a pleasure. Of course, Netlaw Media run a lot of other interesting events, so don't forget to subscribe today and join us for future discussions. So with that, I'll say thank you, everybody, and goodbye.